Hello, everyone. My name is Natalia Cis, and this is my presentation. Today, I'll be analyzing The Fall of the House of Usher, which is a short story by the American writer Edgar Allan Poe, first published in September of 1339. I have had some difficulties coming up with my thesis statement, since this work of art can be considered part of Romanticism, Gothic literature, and/or Dark Romanticism. I have also found the article "The Romantic as Classicist" by Darlene Harbour Unruh to be very interesting, and I recommend that you read it to gain a new perspective on this author. Honestly, it made me want to change my whole presentation. Still, I will be dealing with aspects of Romanticism that I have found to be most important in this short story. My thesis statement is the following: elements that are characteristic of Romanticism are present in the fall of the House of Usher: emotions, nature, and the supernatural. First, the first element that I will analyze is emotion, since it is a key characteristic of Romanticism. This story focuses mostly on the narrator's emotions and his inner world. As readers, we don't really get to learn much about this narrator. In fact, we don't even know what his actual name is. Still, there is a lot to be said about the way he feels, especially because he's constantly making us readers aware of his feelings. There is a connection to the past, happier times spent with Roderick Usher. He mentions that as boys we have been even intimate associates. But Poe doesn't really dwell in the past like that. That's like what other romantic authors do. Most of the time, most of the time, emotions are complex and negative ones, like fear and horror. And then as the story progresses, emotions become stronger, and by the end of the story, the narrator is starting to lose his grip on reality when he starts listening to sounds. But let's start from the beginning. I recommend that you read Joan Lotnick's article, since she thoroughly explains how, little by little, the author realizes that he's becoming mad. She explains that the narrator's first encounter with the house facade and the tarp begins to make him question his mental sanity. And the narrator said, "What was it that so unnerved me in the contemplation of the house of Usher? It was a mystery all insoluble, nor could I grapple with the shadowy fancies that crowded upon me as I pondered. I was forced to fall back upon the unsatisfactory conclusion that, while beyond doubt, there are combinations of very simple natural objects which have the power of thus affecting us. Still, the analysis of this power lies among considerations beyond our depth." Zlotnick states, "The isolation and atmosphere here are important, for they contribute significantly to his developing insanity. He is alone, excluded from the companionship that might enable him in various ways to cope with his sense of alarm. Even before he enters the house for the first time, he has the first crisis." For the sake of timing, I will move on to particular moments that are worth mentioning. So, on entering the house, his fear returns, and the narrator says the following: "A valet of stealthy step thence conducted me in silence through many dark and intricate passages in my progress to the studio of his master. Much that I encountered on the way contributed, I know not how, to heighten the vague sentiments of which I have already spoken. Zlotnick explains that once again, the effects of the isolation and atmosphere on him are manifested. Poe gives vividly recounts of how the house was decorated and which objects were found inside. Most of them um, make the narrator fear. So Usher had a very powerful influence on the narrator too, since it contributed to his feelings of becoming mad. Not only is the narrator isolated from the real world while he stays in this house, he's also spending lots of time with Usher. In that way, he is exposed to irrational elements like Usher's superstitions regarding the house. The narrator experiences certain terrifying aspects of madness as he is in contact with the irrational and the unknown. This further worsens when Usher's sister passes away. The narrator stated, "It was no wonder that his condition terrified, that it infected me. I felt creeping up on me, by slow yet certain degrees, the wild influences of his own fantastic yet impressive superstitions. Usher's behavior exacerbated, and it was the narrator who was keeping him company and trying to cheer him up. Before Usher dies, the narrator feels overpowered by an intense sentiment of horror, unaccountable yet unendurable, as he is unable to go to sleep and he's pacing in his room. He shows some signs of calmness and sanity as he reads Mattress of Sir Lancelot Canning to his friend. However, he is most certainly losing his mind as he claims the following: "I did hear a low and apparently distant but harsh, protracted, most unusual screaming or grating sound." Since we learned the story through this one narrator, it is hard to know for sure what is real and what is unreal. He is in he is an unreliable narrator. At the end of the story, he flees in horror, not only to save his life, but also to save whatever mental sanity he has left. Zlotnick mentions that analyzing Usher isn't really important, since she claims that Usher actually represents characteristics common to all of us, and in this case, these characteristics are presented to the extreme. I understand her point of view, but I believe that it's worth mentioning that fear dominated Usher's life. Fear became worse than his real or imagined problems, and fear controlled his reality. As a result, Usher was pale and unkempt. He feared that the condition that ran in his family, which made his senses more acute, um, and he feared that he was extremely sensitive to these external stimuli that was limiting what he could eat, what he could hear, see, smell. He feared pain, and all of this was part of the cause of his madness. He was aware of his fear. He stated the following: "Mm, To an anomalous species of terror, I found him a bounden slave. I shall perish, said he. I must perish in this deplorable folly. Thus, and not otherwise, shall I be lost. I dread the events of the future, not in themselves, but in their results. I shudder at the thought of any, even the most trivial, incident which may operate upon this intolerable agitation of soul. I have indeed not no abhorrence of danger, except in its absolute effect, in terror. In this unnerved, in this pitiable condition, I feel that the period will sooner or later arrive when I must abandon life and reason together in some struggle with the grim phantasm fear. Finally, a quick word regarding the house. The house stands for Roderick's mind and personality, so decay and collapse. The house and Usher have been linked as if they were one, and his illnesses parallel the decaying state of the crumbling house. The fungi and the physical deterioration of the house symbolizes the physical deterioration of Roderick Usher. Moving on, we will now focus on nature, which is also another topic of recurrence in Romanticism present in the story. Nature is part of the setting of the story since in the beginning we learn that the weather is dark and gloomy on a cold autumn day with low and oppressive clouds while he passes a dreary tract of country. The setting helps this horror story be scary. But most importantly, I want to focus on nature at the beginning and the end of life. Actually, I mostly want to focus on the end of life. As we know, the end of Asher's life, or the Asher sibling, comes around the time as a strange and powerful storm arrives. Let me read this quote. The impetuous fury of the entering gust nearly lifted us from our feet. It was indeed a tempestuous yet sternly beautiful night, and one widely singular in its terror and its beauty. A whirlwind had apparently collected its force in our vicinity, for there were frequent and violent alterations in the direction of the wind, and the exceeding density of the clouds. Moments before Asher dies, canals moved back as it was the work of the rushing gust, and it is from that direction that his sister entered the room where they both finally perished. It is not coincidental that the force of nature is used at the end of the story. When the narrator leaves, he can see the red light of the moon through the big crack of the house, and nature is partially at fault for the fall of the house. Finally, let's talk about the supernatural for a few minutes, since Poe plays with the pre-established limits of reason. The narrator's encounter with Madeline, Asher's sister, is most peculiar. He stated the following: Madeline passed slowly through a remote portion of the apartment and, without having noticed my presence, disappeared. She walked around the house as if she were a ghost. In fact, we later learned that she's terminally ill with something no doctor can explain. A settled apathy, a gradual wasting away of the person, and frequent although transient affections of a partially cataleptical character were the unusual diagnosis. It sounds as if she were suffering a spell. When she's not cataleptic, she drifts from place to place without interacting with people. Then Madeline supposedly dies and her body is entombed below ground. Madeline breaks out of the tomb and comes upstairs and scares her brother to death. So, was she alive the whole time, or is that her spirit? I don't really know for sure. If she was alive the whole time, how did she manage to survive for a whole week in that coffin that was screwed? How did she manage to set herself free from it and even the iron door? Her dress full of blood could perhaps explain it, but it may have been, well, her spirit that freed itself and went to find her brother. We don't know for sure because we already know, like at this point, that the narrator is not a reliable narrator. He's not mentally balanced at the end of the story. Anyways, before she enters the room, it is stated that, as if the superhuman energy of his utterance there had been found the potency of a spell, as if he had summoned Lady Madeline when he said he heard noises. This is a fantastic situation, and it is taken for granted that readers will believe the proposed situation. Reality and fantasy and truth and madness are at odds until the end of until the characters and the house fall apart. Well, this is the end of my presentation. I'd like to go on working with this story in the forum. I have submitted a couple of questions for us to discuss, and I hope to see you there. Thank you for your attention.